On a crisp Saturday afternoon, the sun bathed the streets in golden light as a young black girl named Maya skipped eagerly beside her father Marcus. They had been looking forward to this trip all week ever since Maya had spotted the new toy store opening up in the neighborhood, with its bright colorful signs and windows full of plush toys and shiny dolls. Maya had been dreaming of coming here every day after school, and now it was finally happening. As they approached the entrance, Maya's eyes widened, her little hand clutching her father's with excitement, her sneakers tapping quickly on the pavement. They could hear the hum of music from inside mixed with the soft chatter of other customers. Maya could already feel the thrill of adventure begin to rise in her as she stepped through the door, her gaze immediately drawn to the shelves lined with toys of every kind. There were dolls, action figures, stuffed animals, games, and puzzles, each one seeming to call out her name. She could hardly wait to start looking through everything. Marcus watched his daughter's excitement. With a smile, his heart warmed by the pure joy in her expression. He had always loved seeing her so happy. Maya was his world, and moments like these made everything worthwhile. Even if life had its challenges and struggles, moments like these were the ones that reminded him of why he kept going. It was for her. He took her hand, and they made their way through the store, Maya's fingers brushing against the shelves, her eyes darting from one toy to the next, her small voice filled with wonder as she spoke of all the toys she could get if she had enough money. But Marcus wasn't concerned with the price just yet. He wanted her to enjoy the experience and make a decision in her own time. He followed closely behind as she bounced from one section to another, stopping only to ask for his opinion on which toy she thought was the best. Each question was met with a gentle laugh and a reassuring answer from him. His heart swelled with pride as he looked at the joy in her face. But as they moved deeper into the store, something caught his attention, a shift in the air, a subtle change that made his stomach tighten. At first, he wasn't sure what it was, but the feeling nagged at him like an uninvited guest. Something felt off. The store owner had been watching them for the past few minutes. Marcus had noticed him glancing their way more than once. The man's eyes narrowed, his posture stiff. As he moved behind the counter, the look wasn't overtly hostile, but there was something unsettling about it. Marcus couldn't put his finger on it, but something told him to pay attention. His protective instincts kicked in. He had learned to trust his gut over the years. It was a survival skill, something that kept him and his daughter safe in a world that didn't always treat them fairly. Maya was still happily distracted by the toys, lost in her own little world. As she picked up a stuffed bear and hugged it to her chest, Marcus kept his gaze on the owner, who seemed to be growing more and more watchful. The tension was building, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. Maya called out to him, asking him to come look at a doll dressed in a sparkly princess gown. Marcus smiled and nodded, but his mind couldn't let go of the feeling that had settled in his chest. As he approached his daughter, he glanced at the owner once more and noticed the man had moved closer to them, his eyes now following them more closely. Marcus took a deep breath and walked over to Maya, trying to push away the uneasy thoughts. But he couldn't ignore the feeling that something was about to change, something was about to happen that he hadn't expected, and he wasn't sure if he was ready for it. But he was about to find out just how wrong he could be. As Marcus stood beside Maya, looking at the doll she had chosen, his eyes drifted back to the store owner, who was now standing at the counter staring intently at them, his gaze sharp and cold like a hawk eyeing its prey. Marcus tried to ignore it, but the tension in the air was undeniable. Maya's voice cut through his thoughts as she giggled, holding the doll up to show him, her excitement written all over her face. But Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that the owner was watching them with an uncomfortable intensity. He smiled at Maya as she chattered on about the doll, how it looked like a princess, how she wished she could have it. But all the while his eyes never left the man at the counter, who now seemed to be moving toward them, slowly, his steps deliberate. Marcus didn't want to ruin Maya's moment. Her joy was too pure, but something inside him told him to stay alert, to watch closely. And sure enough, the store owner approached them with a look on his face that sent a chill down Marcus's spine. His smile was tight-forced, and as he cleared his throat to speak, Marcus could see the tension in his body, the way his shoulders were stiff, like he was preparing for a confrontation. The father's protective instincts kicked in, and his hand subtly moved closer to his daughter As if to shield her from whatever was coming, the owner's voice broke the silence, low and clipped as he addressed them. "Excuse me, sir, but your daughter needs to leave." Marcus blinked in confusion for a moment, wondering if he had misheard the words. Had he really just said that? The owner's eyes were no longer just cold, but accusing, his tone dripping with a thinly veiled hostility. Maya paused her excited chatter and looked up at her father, her small face full of confusion. Marcus felt his heart sink. What did he mean, leave? She hadn't done anything wrong. She had been nothing but polite, enjoying the store like any other child. He felt the words on the tip of his tongue. But before he could speak, the owner added in an almost dismissive tone, "She's causing trouble." Marcus felt a flare of anger rise within him. Trouble? What kind of trouble could his little girl possibly be causing? She hadn't touched anything without asking, hadn't spoken out of turn, hadn't even complained once about the long aisles or the overwhelming choices. Marcus felt his fists clench, but he forced himself to remain calm, to keep his voice steady. He didn't want to escalate this. He needed to understand why this was happening. With a deep breath, he looked the store owner directly in the eyes and asked in a measured tone, "Why is she being asked to leave? She's just looking at the toys like any other kid." The owner didn't answer right away. Instead, he shifted his weight nervously and glanced around the store, as if searching for something Marcus couldn't quite read, but the unspoken tension grew more palpable. The father's mind raced. This wasn't just a misunderstanding, it wasn't just an innocent mistake. There was something more happening here. He could feel it deep down in his gut. Something was wrong. The store was small, but it wasn't that small. Maya had barely moved from where they were standing, and in the moments before the owner had approached them, there had been no sign of trouble. No commotion, no issues with the other customers. Marcus looked around the store, trying to find something, anything that could explain the strange turn of events, but he found nothing that made sense. His eyes returned to the store owner, whose demeanor had shifted from tense to defensive, as if expecting an argument. Marcus didn't know what he was about to do, but he knew one thing for certain: he wasn't going to let anyone treat his daughter this way, not without a fight. Marcus stood there staring at the store owner, his mind racing as the words sunk in. His daughter needed to leave for causing trouble. What trouble? Marcus thought to himself. Maya had been nothing but well-behaved, quiet and respectful. She had barely touched anything, and now she was being accused of causing trouble. He looked down at her face, her big brown eyes filled with confusion and a hint of hurt. She didn't understand why she was being singled out. She didn't know why they were suddenly being asked to leave. She had just wanted to look at toys like any other child, but now she was being told to leave as though she didn't belong. Marcus felt his anger rise, his protective instincts flaring up like a wildfire. The need to defend his daughter, to shield her from this injustice, grew stronger by the second, but he forced himself to stay calm, to keep his voice steady, to not give the store owner the satisfaction of seeing him lose control. He glanced around the store and noticed the other customers were beginning to take notice. Some looked away, as if trying to avoid getting involved, but a few watched the scene unfold with growing curiosity and unease. Marcus could feel the weight of their eyes on him. He could sense the judgment that was silently passing between them, but he couldn't focus on them, not now. His attention was solely on the owner, who was still standing there watching him expectantly, waiting for him to comply. Marcus shook his head in disbelief. How could this be happening? Why was his daughter being treated like this? He turned his gaze back to the owner, who was now standing a little taller, as if expecting some kind of confrontation. Well, he would get one. Marcus wasn't going to let this go, not without an explanation. "Why don't you explain to me exactly what trouble she's caused?" Marcus's voice was firm, steady, but there was an underlying edge to it that couldn't be ignored. The owner's eyes flickered nervously as he took a step back, looking around the store again before finally speaking. "Well, she's been walking around making others uncomfortable." Marcus's jaw clenched. He could hardly believe what he was hearing. Others uncomfortable? What did that even mean? Uncomfortable? How could a child walking through a toy store make anyone uncomfortable? He glanced at Maya, who was still holding her doll in her small hands, her innocent face still puzzled by the entire situation. She wasn't making anyone uncomfortable. She was simply being a child. Marcus knew this wasn't just about Maya's behavior. It was about something more, something deeper, something that had nothing to do with her and everything to do with how people saw her, how people saw them. As a father and daughter, he could feel the injustice hanging thick in the air. He took a step forward, his voice low, but unwavering. This is unacceptable. She hasn't done anything wrong. I demand to know why you're treating her like this. The store owner didn't respond immediately, but his eyes shifted nervously around the store again. And that's when Marcus saw it, the shift in the man's posture, the way his shoulders tensed as if ready for something worse to happen. Marcus could see the fear in the man's eyes. He wasn't just trying to get them to leave now, he was trying to cover up something he didn't want anyone to know. Marcus could feel the pieces falling into place. The owner was scared of something. And it wasn't Maya, it was the truth. He stepped closer, his presence growing more imposing now. I'm not going anywhere until you explain yourself. And I'm not leaving here without my daughter being treated fairly. He felt a sense of power surge through him. He wasn't going to let this go. He wasn't going to let them intimidate him or make him back down. Not when he knew what was right and wrong. Maya looked up at him, now sensing the change in his tone, sensing his determination. She held the doll tighter in her hands, her little face still confused, but now filled with a quiet trust. She didn't know what was happening, but she knew her father was there to protect her no matter what. The store owner swallowed hard and finally spoke, his voice strained and nervous. I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to cause any trouble. I thought she was. Well, it's just we've had a few issues with children lately causing disruptions, but I didn't mean to target your daughter. It's just that. Marcus's eyes narrowed as he waited for the rest of the explanation. But it wasn't coming. Marcus stood there staring at the store owner, waiting for him to finish his explanation. But the man seemed to falter, as if he wasn't sure how to continue, his words hanging awkwardly in the air. The unease in the store was thick now. People were starting to shift uncomfortably as they noticed the escalating tension. But Marcus didn't care about their stares. He was focused entirely on the man in front of him, the store owner who had dared to treat his daughter like she was nothing more than a problem he could push aside. Marcus could feel his pulse quicken, the anger bubbling up, but he kept it under control because he knew this wasn't about him. It wasn't even about the toys. It was about something far deeper, something rooted in the way people viewed his family. He took a deep breath and spoke again, his voice steady and calm, though the words were sharp and filled with undeniable resolve. You're telling me that because you've had a few issues with other children, you've decided to treat my daughter like this? He let the words hang in the air as the store owner shifted uncomfortably under his gaze. But the owner didn't reply right away. His eyes flickered nervously around the store, like he was looking for a way out, as if hoping that maybe Marcus would just back down and leave. But Marcus wasn't going anywhere, not until he got the truth out of this man, not until he got an answer that made sense. Maya's grip on her doll tightened as she looked up at her father. She was still confused, not fully understanding what was happening, but she could sense the seriousness in his voice and the change in the air around them. Marcus could see that she was starting to feel the weight of the moment. Her innocent joy had been shattered, and in its place was uncertainty, a feeling that no child should have to face at a toy store. He reached down and gently squeezed her hand, letting her know he was still there, that she was safe. But the tension between him and the store owner was palpable, and the silence stretched on like a heavy fog as the owner continued to avoid Marcus's gaze. Eventually, the man cleared his throat again and spoke in a voice that was now quieter, more defensive. It's not like that. It's just that lately some kids have been causing trouble, breaking things, making a mess. And I just thought I had to be careful, that's all. Marcus stared at him, his mind trying to process the words. What did that have to do with Maya? He looked at his daughter again, her face still filled with confusion, but there was a flicker of something else. Now a hint of hurt in her eyes. She didn't understand why she was being treated this way, why she was being made to feel like she was the one at fault. Marcus knelt down beside her and gently cupped her face. Maya, baby, don't worry, we're going to be okay. He smiled at her, trying to reassure her, though he could feel the storm of emotions brewing inside him. He turned back to the store owner, and his voice grew colder. You're telling me that because of a few kids causing trouble, you think it's okay to treat my daughter like this? Like she's just another troublemaker? He shook his head in disbelief. The injustice of it all, the unfairness of the situation, was like a weight pressing down on his chest. But he refused to let it break him. He wasn't going to back down. He wasn't going to let this man get away with making his daughter feel less than. He stood up straight and faced the owner, his voice unwavering. "I'm not going anywhere until you tell me exactly why you think my daughter is the problem, and why you think she should leave this store." He waited for the man to respond, but this time the store owner didn't look away. He didn't shift uncomfortably. Instead, his face flushed with guilt, and his shoulders slumped as if the weight of his own actions were finally catching up to him. Marcus could see the shift in the man's demeanor, and for the first time since this whole ordeal started, he saw a glimpse of remorse. But it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to erase the wrong that had already been done. Maya had been hurt, and there was no undoing that. But maybe, just maybe, the store owner was about to realize the gravity of his mistake and offer the apology that Marcus knew he deserved. But it wasn't going to be easy. The store owner stood there in front of Marcus, his face now red with a mixture of guilt and discomfort, his hands fidgeting as if he didn't know where to place them. Marcus could see that the man was starting to crack. The walls he had built around himself were slowly crumbling, and though part of Marcus wanted to keep pushing, he knew this was the moment when everything could change, when the truth could come to light. He stood there silently watching the owner, who finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean to make her feel unwelcome. I just thought I had to be cautious after what happened last week." Marcus tilted his head in confusion. What happened last week? The store owner hesitated for a moment, his eyes flickering toward the counter before he finally let out a long breath. "A group of children came in, and they caused a lot of trouble, broke some toys, ran around yelling. I wasn't sure what was going on, but I thought maybe they were just playing. But after they left, I found a few things damaged, and I didn't want it happening again." Marcus could hear the regret in the man's voice. But it didn't change what had just happened, what had been done to his daughter. This wasn't about her. It was about the fear and assumptions the owner had allowed to cloud his judgment. This was about the prejudice that Marcus had always fought against in his life, the kind of unfair treatment that had become all too familiar. And now it was happening to his little girl. He clenched his jaw, trying to keep his anger in check, trying to listen to what the man was saying, but the injustice still burned inside him. "So what you're telling me is that you assumed my daughter was causing trouble because she looks like someone who might break things?" Marcus's words cut through the air, his voice sharp now and full of disbelief. The store owner flinched slightly as if the words hit him harder than he expected, but he didn't deny it. "No," he said quietly, "I didn't think that exactly, but I was worried about the damage. And after seeing her walk around so much, I just thought I should say something." Marcus's hands curled into fists, but he kept his voice. "Even this isn't about damage. This isn't about what she was doing or how much she was walking around. This is about how you've treated her, how you've made her feel as though she doesn't belong because of the way she looks." The owner's eyes widened. For a moment his mouth opened, as if he was about to say something, but then he stopped as if the weight of Marcus's words hit him with full force. Marcus stood there waiting for him to speak, but the store owner was silent, staring at the floor, his face a mixture of shame and confusion. Marcus could feel the atmosphere shift around them. The other customers who had been watching the exchange now stood in complete silence, some exchanging looks, others avoiding eye contact, all of them aware that something had shifted, something was changing here, and they could feel the heaviness of the moment. Marcus looked at Maya, who was still holding her doll, her small hands clutching it tightly. Her face was still full of confusion, but there was also a growing sense of understanding. She wasn't just watching what was happening. She was starting to feel the weight of it too. But Marcus wasn't going to let her be hurt any longer. He wasn't going to let her walk away from this, thinking that the world could treat her this way, that the world could judge her based on something as shallow as her appearance. He looked back at the owner, who had finally raised his eyes to meet Marcus's gaze. There was no denying the guilt there, no denying that the man had realized what he had done wrong. But that wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to undo the hurt that Maya had felt, or the damage that had been caused by a simple assumption. But Marcus knew that it was a start. Maybe, just maybe, the man could change. Maybe he could learn something from this moment. Maybe he could walk away understanding that no one should ever have to feel the way Maya felt right now. Maybe he could make this right. but not without truly understanding what had happened here, and not without apologizing for it. The store owner stood there looking at Marcus, his eyes filled with uncertainty. As the weight of his actions began to sink in, it was clear that he hadn't expected this kind of confrontation, or for the truth of his assumptions to be laid bare in front of him. He shifted on his feet, and for a brief moment, Marcus could almost see the struggle inside the man, wrestling with the reality of what he had done. He had let fear take control, and it had clouded his judgment to the point where he had treated Maya unfairly. But Marcus wasn't going to let him off easy, not without making it right. The silence stretched between them, thick and uncomfortable. Maya was still holding the doll in her hands, her little face still confused, but there was a quiet strength in her eyes, now a sense that she was beginning to understand the seriousness of the situation. She may not have understood all the details yet, but she could feel the tension, and she knew her father was fighting for her, and that was all that mattered. Marcus took a deep breath and stepped forward, his voice softer now, but still firm. This isn't just about the toys or about being asked to leave. This is about teaching my daughter a lesson in fairness and respect. She deserves to be treated just like every other child who walks into this store, to feel welcome and safe, not judged based on assumptions and fears. The owner swallowed hard and nodded, as if the words had finally hit him in a way that made him realize the gravity of the situation. He seemed to shrink a little, as though he understood the hurt he had caused. He took another step forward, and his voice was almost pleading. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to make her feel like she wasn't welcome. I've been so focused on making sure nothing goes wrong that I forgot what really matters. I forgot to treat her with the respect she deserves." Marcus stood there for a moment, watching the store owner's face and trying to gauge whether the apology was genuine. It was hard to tell, but there was something in the way the man spoke now, something different from before, something that made Marcus think maybe he was finally seeing the error of his ways. But even then, the damage had been done. Maya had already been made to feel unwelcome, and no apology could take that away. He looked down at his daughter, whose eyes were still on him, waiting for him to make the call, to say what needed to be said and what was right. "Maya, sweetheart, you're okay," he said gently, reaching down to pat her head. Her small shoulders relaxed a little, and she gave him a tiny nod. She trusted him. He could feel it in the way she held onto him and the way she looked to him for guidance. She had always believed that he would protect her, and this moment was no different. But it wasn't over. Marcus knew that he needed to make sure that this man truly understood what had happened here, that it wasn't just a simple misunderstanding, but a moment that spoke to something much deeper, something far more systemic that needed to be addressed. He took a deep breath and looked the store owner in the eye again. "You have to understand that what you did goes beyond just asking her to leave. You assumed things about her based on the color of her skin, and because of that you made her feel like she didn't belong here, that she wasn't worthy of being treated with the same respect as every other child who walked in here. You've taught her a painful lesson today, and that's something that won't be easily forgotten." The store owner's face flushed with embarrassment and regret, and for a moment he looked as if he were going to say something more, but he held back, his lips pressed into a thin line, as if the words were stuck in his throat. Marcus didn't know if the apology would ever feel truly sincere, if the man would ever fully understand the damage that had been done. But he hoped that this moment would be a turning point, not just for the store owner, but for anyone who witnessed it. He wanted people to know that this kind of behavior couldn't be tolerated, and that no one should ever be made to feel less than because of the color of their skin. Marcus glanced around at the few customers who had been quietly watching the exchange. Some were now looking at the ground, while others were avoiding eye contact entirely, but a few looked directly at Marcus, with an expression of quiet understanding and perhaps even a touch of shame, as if they too were seeing something that had been hidden in plain sight for far too long. Marcus turned his attention back to the owner, who was now standing there silently. His head hung low, the weight of the moment sinking in the silence was heavy. But it wasn't over yet. There was still something left to do, something important, to make sure Maya left this store with her dignity intact, and the knowledge that her father would always fight for her no matter what. The silence hung in the air, thick and heavy, as Marcus watched the store owner. His head still hung low, his hands trembling slightly, like he was waiting for the world to collapse around him. Marcus could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He had fought for this moment, he had fought for Maya, but the true resolution was still far off. He could see the regret in the store owner's eyes. But it wasn't enough, not yet. Marcus couldn't just walk away, not when there was still so much to address. Maya stood quietly beside him, her small hand still gripping his with a quiet strength that belied her age. She had been through so much today. She had been made to feel small and unimportant. But now she stood at her father's side, knowing that he wouldn't let anyone take away her sense of worth, knowing that he would stand by her no matter what. Marcus reached down and gave her hand a gentle squeeze before turning back to the owner. He wasn't going to let this be brushed aside, not without making sure this man understood that the damage wasn't just to the toys or to the store, but to the hearts and minds of the people who came in here expecting to be treated with kindness and fairness, not judgment based on assumptions. The store owner finally lifted his head and met Marcus's gaze, his eyes filled with shame and guilt. But this time there was something else too, something that wasn't there before, something that spoke of understanding, a realization that was slowly settling in. He swallowed hard before speaking, his voice thick with emotion. I never thought about it that way. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I thought I was doing the right thing by being cautious. But now I see that it wasn't right at all. He paused, as if searching for the right words, and Marcus could see the sincerity in his face. The man was truly trying to come to terms with what he had done, and though it wasn't enough to undo the pain that had been caused, Marcus couldn't help but acknowledge that it was a start. It was a step in the right direction. But the work wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. Marcus let out a deep breath and spoke softly but firmly. The damage has been done here today. And it's not just about words, it's about the way people are treated, the assumptions made based on their race, their appearance. It's about making sure this never happens again. Marcus could see the owner nodding slowly, as if the truth of his words were sinking in. This wasn't just an isolated incident. This was part of a much bigger problem. And it wasn't something that could be fixed with an apology or a simple act of contrition. No, this was about changing the way people thought, the way people acted, the way they viewed the world and those who lived in it. He paused for a moment and glanced down at Maya, whose face had softened slightly, though the confusion hadn't completely faded. She was starting to understand in her own way. She knew her father was fighting for her. And that's all that mattered. Marcus looked back at the store owner and said with quiet intensity, "You have a responsibility here, not just to sell toys, but to create an environment where all children feel welcome, where they feel seen and valued, no matter where they come from or what they look like." The owner's face was pale as he nodded again. This time his voice was barely above a whisper. "I'll do better, I promise." Marcus stood there for a moment longer, watching the store owner and feeling the weight of what had just happened. But there was a shift in the air, something that felt different. The owner wasn't just apologizing. Now he was committing to change. He was acknowledging that his actions had been wrong and that he would work to make sure something like this didn't happen again. Marcus knew this wasn't the end of the story, but it was a beginning. It was a start of something better, a start of understanding that would ripple outward, not just for Maya, but for every other child who walked through that door. Marcus turned to Maya and smiled, a small but reassuring smile. It was enough for her to know that her father had done what was needed. She hadn't been the problem today. She hadn't been the one to cause the trouble. It was the unfair assumptions made by someone who should have known better. She didn't understand all the details, but she understood that her father was there for her, and that was enough. He took her hand in his, and together they began to walk toward the door. But before they left, Marcus turned one last time to the owner and said quietly, "I'll be watching, and I'll make sure this place lives up to the promise you just made." He didn't need to say more. The weight of his words hung in the air. As they walked out of the store, Maya looking up at her father with a smile that was slowly returning to her face. He had fought for her, he had stood up for her, and in that moment, Marcus knew he had done something far more important than just protecting his daughter. He had shown her what it meant to stand up for what was right, to fight against injustice, and to make the world a little better, one step at a time. As Marcus and Maya stepped out of the store, the door closing behind them, there was a sense of finality, but also a sense of hope. Something had shifted in that moment, something that could never be undone. Marcus walked with purpose, his hand holding his daughter's tightly, as they made their way down the street, the weight of everything that had happened still heavy on his chest, but also lighter than it had been moments before. There was still a fire burning within him. But it wasn't one of anger anymore. It was one of resolve, a determination to make sure that his daughter would grow up in a world that treated her with the respect and fairness she deserved. Maya was walking a little more confidently, now the confusion fading from her eyes, though she was still processing everything she had witnessed today. She hadn't fully understood what had just happened, but she understood that her father had stood up for her, that he had fought for her, that he had made sure she knew she was loved and valued. Marcus glanced down at her as they walked, his heart swelling with pride. He didn't know how much of what had happened she would remember when she grew older, but he hoped that she would remember the lesson the most, the lesson about standing up for what was right and never allowing anyone to make you feel less than you were. Maya looked up at him, her small face filled with curiosity. "Daddy, are we going to go back home?" Marcus smiled down at her and nodded. "Yes, sweetheart, we're going back home. But we're also going to make sure that everyone knows that no one should ever be treated like that. Not you, not anyone." She smiled a little wider, the light from the street lamps above casting a soft glow on her face. And in that moment, Marcus felt a deep sense of peace. He had done what he needed to do today, and he had shown his daughter the importance of standing firm for justice. He had also shown her that sometimes the right thing to do wasn't easy, it wasn't always clear, and it didn't always feel good, but it was always worth it. Maya was still holding onto her doll, and as they continued walking, her steps were a little lighter now, as if the weight she had been carrying had finally been lifted. But Marcus knew that they were both still thinking about what had happened today, still processing it in their own ways. He knew that there would be times in the future when Maya would face situations like this again, and he also knew that he couldn't always be there to protect her, but he could teach her the lessons she needed to face the world with courage and confidence. He could teach her that her voice mattered and that she was worthy of respect, no matter who she was or where she came from. Back at home, Marcus made dinner for the two of them, and they ate together in silence for a while, the warmth of their little kitchen surrounding them with a sense of calm and security. Maya was quiet, but there was a sense of peace in her eyes that hadn't been there before. She had been through something that no child should have to experience, but she had come through it stronger, more aware of the world around her and of the love and protection her father would always provide for her. Marcus finished his meal and looked at Maya across the table. "I want you to always remember that you are worthy of love and respect, no matter what anyone else says or does." "Okay." She looked up at him and nodded. "I know, Daddy. I know." He smiled and reached across the table to squeeze her hand. "I love you so much, Maya. You are my world, and I will always fight for you." She smiled back at him, her eyes shining with a quiet strength that made his heart swell with pride. He knew that whatever challenges the world might throw at them in the future, they would face them together, and they would face them with the same courage and resolve that had carried them through today. The next morning, Marcus took Maya back to the store. It wasn't about confrontation. It wasn't about proving anything. It was about showing that change had to be real and lasting. He walked in holding her hand, and the store owner was there behind the counter. He looked up and immediately saw them. He seemed nervous, almost hesitant, but he stepped forward with a genuine look of remorse and said softly, "I want to apologize again for what happened. I've thought a lot about it, and I understand now that I was wrong." Maya smiled softly at him, and Marcus nodded slowly. It was a small gesture, but it meant something real. He had kept his word and made sure that the owner knew what had happened wasn't just a mistake. It was a wake-up call, a reminder that people could change if they were willing to, and that sometimes standing up for what was right made all the difference. As they walked out of the store, Marcus looked down at his daughter and smiled. She had learned so much today, not just about the world, but about her father and about herself, and that made everything worth it.